welcome back to Mediocre Sports Talk, courtesy of Daniel Moreno. Come for the sports talk, leave because it's mediocre. Today I am recording once again back in my apartment in downtown Toronto, the student residence that I live in. This will most likely be the last episode I record in this building, because I'm moving out minimum. I have to be out of here in 2 weeks. I'll probably be out of here next week, and I plan on spending most of next week back in Caledon. And hopefully getting John back on the podcast. That's the plan right now. Like I said last week, I want to do most of these episodes with someone else instead of doing it by myself. But yeah, that'll be a lot easier once I move out of here. So yeah, should be John back on the podcast next week. But for today, just a little quick episode. Just going to touch on some stuff in the NFL and then, go over some narratives that have come out of UFC 214 from Saturday, which was an amazing event. It was stacked top to bottom. I talked about it a lot the last few weeks about how good the card was, but it really, come fight night, it really delivered. Save for one really bad fight, which I'll get to, the card really delivered on all cylinders. It was amazing. But like I said, let's start off in the NFL. The original plan was to have a story published yesterday, and I did start writing it two or 3 days ago. I already had it like halfway written, and basically I was excited. It was August 1st, and I wanted to start projecting the NFL season. I've been waiting for this all summer. I've been kind of kicking myself for launching a podcast and a blog in June, when sports kind of starts to die down because the NFL is off, the NBA ends, the NHL ends, and then it's just baseball, right? You get the off season for a bit, but that can only last for so long, right? Now it's August, and there's so much to project for the NFL season. It's the easiest sport to really preview, or at least it's the funnest, right? Especially with fantasy football. So I was really excited about that. So I wanted to give my first preview of the season. It was going to be a 2 or 3 part series focusing on, I was going to project every single game of the whole season and use that to actually give an accurate projection of teams' records. I see a lot of people that just say, like, Dolphins, 9-7, just because the Dolphins are a 9-7 team. It's not how you project someone's record. You have to actually go through the schedule. Some teams have, easy schedules. Some teams have tough schedules. Like, a lot goes into it. Obviously, it's going to be hard to project who's going to win every single game before the season. You don't know who's going to break out. You don't know who's going to fall off. You don't know what injuries are going to happen. But it is super lazy to project teams' records without actually looking at their schedule. So I was going to predict every single game and use that to create the records. And I did that for the AFC, and that's why I started writing the AFC article. But then, everything just becomes so irrelevant when players start getting hurt in preseason. I pushed it back a day, and then, with the reason I mentioned the Dolphins, with Ryan Tannehill getting hurt this morning, it looks like, as of the time I'm recording this podcast, looks like it might not be as bad as previously expected, but still, that's an injury that can completely derail any projections I had for them. In the NFL, you only go as far as your quarterback can take you, right? Matt Moore is not bringing the Dolphins to the playoffs. You might not think the Dolphins are a playoff team, but I had them projected at 10-6. I looked at the record, and I had them at 10-6, which was good enough for 5th seed in the AFC. But with Matt Moore at quarterback, that goes way down, probably 6-10. Any game I was on the fence about definitely goes the other way, right? So I had to scrap that, put that on the back burner for a bit. I realized that there's so many injuries in the NFL, especially in preseason and in training camp, that at some point I'm just going to have to sit down and do it, but I'm just going to give it a little more time. But with the whole Ryan Tannehill thing, with the whole Joe Flacco thing, well, he's hurt now, I did want to talk about a certain quarterback who does not have a team and who's been in the news a lot despite not being on a team right now. That's Colin Kaepernick. Now, I don't really like talking about things just because people are, how do I explain this? Like, I don't like talking about something because it's a hot topic, despite it not being that relevant, right? But the and you can argue that Kaepernick shouldn't be this big of a topic because he's not on a team, but it is relevant, and especially now that I kind of expected when Kaepernick didn't get signed at first. This is the time where I expected him to get signed for sure. When teams start losing quarterbacks or realizing that their backup's not good enough or whatever. And it seems that there is a genuine backlash coming from fans about their teams potentially signing Colin Kaepernick. And that's just something I don't understand, right? You look at the NFL right now, and there are at least a few teams that if Colin Kaepernick were to play for right now, he would be the starter, right? If Colin Kaepernick got signed to the Denver Broncos, he'd probably be the starter. Like, I know the Broncos are pretty happy about Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch, but let's be honest, if you go skill for skill right now, Colin Kaepernick would start on that football team, I believe. That's not to say Kaepernick's great. Like, there's a reason he's not signed to any team right now. But, man, this guy, he's won playoff games. He went to a Super Bowl. He played for a great team. But this guy, Kaepernick has upside, right? He's better than Trevor Siemian. The Jacksonville Jaguars. Honestly, right now, he's better than Blake Bortles. Now, with Bortles, he's going into, his fourth season? Third or fourth season. And the Jags are kind of hoping this is the year finally, figures it out, becomes more consistent, because you have his rookie season where he wasn't that great, his second season where he kind of broke out a little bit, and his third season where he regressed. So I guess what the Jaguars are hoping is that he finally sets things straight, gets back on the right path, and stays consistent this season. But from what we saw from Blake Bortles last year, Colin Kaepernick's better. And if Bortles doesn't improve this season, I mean, why not go after a guy like Kaepernick? Or worst case, if you're not sure right now, because hindsight's 2020, sign Kaepernick to at least push Bortles, right? I mean, he's going into his fourth season. This is not a guy that you have to worry about hurting his feelings because you brought in a quarterback to push him. Light a fire under his ass. And then if you can't deal with it, if he falls apart, then Kaepernick's your starter. Because the Blake Bortles that played last year was not good enough to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And this team has been building for a long time. They've been bad for a long time. And they've had a lot of off seasons that made me think this team is just on the cusp. This past off season, I thought they did great. I'm so ready for the Jaguars to burst through. And really, their defense looks sick right now. I never thought I would say this about a Jacksonville Jaguars team, but their defense looks amazing right now. And they have weapons on offense. They have the Allen brothers at receiver, Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns. That's a great receiver duo. They had just drafted Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette's one of the best running back prospects in years. I mean, that's huge. He seems like the type of guy that can carry an offense. And they already have pieces at receiver. Their offensive line could use work, especially with Brandon Albert just retiring the other day. But still, they have the pieces there for a good offense. If Blake Bortles had developed the way that a third overall pick or second overall pick, whatever he was, I think it was third, should have by this point, they'd be a playoff team. They'd win that division, right? With that defense and those receivers and that running back. Yes, the offensive line is lacking, but a good quarterback can trump that, especially when he has weapons and a good defense to fall back on. But he's just not getting it done. This team is ready to break out. They've been ready for a year or two now. So it's time. And I think Kaepernick would be a great signing for them. Push Bortles to get to that level, and if he doesn't, let Kaepernick try to get you there. Again, it's not ideal that Kaepernick is your starting quarterback, but if he's better than Bortles, it's time to stop babying him, right? You look at other teams. There are teams I understand where Kaepernick would be their best player or their best quarterback, but like I understand them not signing him. For example, the Cleveland Browns. Like the Cleveland Browns, it just doesn't make sense to sign a guy like Kaepernick. They just drafted Deshaun Kaiser, whatever, at the beginning of the second round, and he seems like one of those guys that could be their guy going forward, right? You want to see what you have with Kaiser. They have Cody Kessler, who they're really high on. I mean, I don't really see it with Kessler, but who knows? Like they feel like they have something there. From what I've read, the best case scenario for the Browns is that Kaiser turns into the quarterback they want him to be, the quarterback of the future, and he's really impressing in training camp right now. And if that happens, they would like to develop Kessler into either a really good backup or a guy who they can trade in the future to a team who needs a starting quarterback. And they have all that money tied into Brock Osweiler right now. It just, for a team like Cleveland, it doesn't make sense, even though he probably would be at this moment their best quarterback if they signed him. Then there's teams like the Jets, who they're almost trying to lose right now, to draft a quarterback in the next draft, so it just wouldn't make sense. The Jets are outwardly tanking right now. They're not trying to improve at quarterback unless they're getting like a really young stud, right? So Kaepernick doesn't fit the mold at all for the Jets. They want to see what they got with the guys they have on the roster right now, and that includes quarterback. But ultimately, they're just trying to get a good draft pick for next year. This year is just a tryout for a bunch of guys. A team like the 49ers, they just kind of had a messy breakup with Kaepernick, so it doesn't make sense to go back there. Again, the Rams are another team they're trying to develop what they have with Jared Goff. He could be a nice guy to push Goff, but Goff's only going into his second year, so I get it. So there are teams where he'd be the best quarterback, but it doesn't make sense. But again, Jaguars makes a lot of sense. Broncos, I don't know. I mean, I guess they have two quarterbacks that I don't think are as good as Kaepernick, but I guess they're still trying to push them, and I don't really know with the Broncos. But then the Tennessee Titans have a quarterback in Marcus Mariota who got hurt at the end of last season, so why not? I mean, maybe Kaepernick is telling teams that he doesn't want to sign unless he's going to be their starting quarterback. So maybe that's why some teams haven't pursued him as a backup, because I can't see him asking for that much money. I mean, it's August, and he'd be a backup for a lot of teams in the NFL. So why? There's no way he's asking for a lot of money. So the only thing I can think of for teams like the Titans that haven't pursued him or haven't signed him is that he's saying, I want to be a starter. But if that's not the case, you're the Titans, you have a quarterback like Marcus Mariota who got hurt last year. Forgive me, I don't remember who their backup is, but if I don't remember, I'm just assuming it's no one special. Wouldn't you want a nice insurance policy like Colin Kaepernick? Because there's no backup in the league that's better than Colin Kaepernick. There is not one backup in the league. Other than, like Jimmy Garoppolo. Right? That's a little different because he's developing under Tom Brady. But other than that, there's not one backup in the league that's better than Colin Kaepernick. He might not be your ideal starter. He's not that young. He's not old, but he's not that young. And he's kind of fallen to the point where, he's not going to win you games anymore, but he's good enough. And with Mariota hurting himself at the end of last season, I would think you'd want a nice insurance policy so that if something happens to Mariota again, you pick him up. The Ravens, it baffles me that the Ravens haven't signed Colin Kaepernick yet. Baffles me. You cannot go for I was just saying that there is not one backup quarterback in the league other than Jimmy Garoppolo who is better than Colin Kaepernick. Now with the Ravens, we have clear evidence of that. Ryan Mallett. You're going to tell me you'd rather Ryan Mallett be the quarterback of your team than Colin Kaepernick? Ryan Mallett can't even set an alarm on his iPhone, and you want him as your quarterback. Even if it's just for 3 games. You don't understand how big those 3 games are going to be for the Ravens. When I was projecting all these teams' records, the Ravens, for like according to my projections, are going to either like, if it wasn't for Flacco's injury, they'd be a playoff team, 5th seed, 6th seed, they'd be probably a wild card team, right? But those 3 games at the beginning of the schedule, if you look at those games, they're easy games, right? I'll look them up right now, but they're games that the Ravens should win. But with Flacco out, like a team without a quarterback, that could cripple you, right? And quarterback's the most important position in all of sports, not just football, in all of sports. So if Flacco's out the first 3 games, they play the Bengals, Browns, Jaguars. Like, it's almost a bad thing that those first 3 games should be gimmies for the Ravens. Like, at full strength, 100%, the Bengals, I think, are going to suck this year. The Browns are the Browns, and the Jaguars are the Jaguars. You would assume that the Ravens win all 3 of those games. But without Flacco, I mean, I can definitely see them dropping at least 1 to the Jaguars or the Bengals. I can definitely see them losing 2. Again, they're the better team in all 3 cases. They're the better coach team, so they can easily go 3-0 without Flacco. But missing your quarterback is everything. And slipping up in gimme games, especially at the beginning of the season, can come back to bite you at the end. You know what I mean? It might put you in a position where you have to beat the Raiders in Oakland in order to get back on track, or beat the Packers later on in the season, right? Like, there's only 16 games in a season. Somehow, some way, almost every team will have like 4 gimmies, 4 ones that they're probably not going to win. Like, I don't know, like, we're not talking about teams like the Patriots when I'm looking at these teams' records, but like if you're a team like the Ravens, or the Titans or the Dolphins that are kind of hanging around the middle, those teams always have, somehow, some way, they always have, like, obviously their division games, so that's 6, and then they'll have, with the remaining 10, it's always like 4 gimmies, we'll say 3 gimmies, 3 ones that they're almost definitely going to lose, and then 4 that are like in the middle. You know what I mean? When you lose the gimmies, you're putting yourself in a position where you have to win. You can't split those in the middle games, or you have to win one of those ones that you're supposed to lose, right? Losing to the Jaguars or Bengals or both would kill the Ravens season. So why aren't you looking at, like, you don't want to go into those games with Ryan Mallett. It's a big deal in football to go shorthanded into any game. If in the NHL, the Toronto Maple Leafs with Frederick Anderson, if he's hurt right now and he's going to miss a week, it's not that big of a deal. They go 0-4, it sucks, and that's going to be a bit of a setback, but it's not the end of their season. If you go 0-3 in the NFL, your season's pretty much done. You know what I mean? And again, they're not going to go 0-3. Like, the Ravens are too good of a team, their defense is too good, their coaching is too good. They're not going to go 0-3 against those 3 dog shit teams. But losing just 1 or 2 of those games will come back to bite them. And you want to go into those games with Ryan Mallett? People can argue with me all they want that there are teams with a better backup than Colin Kaepernick, and then we'd have to have an argument about how good Kaepernick really is. And we can have that argument, but you cannot argue to me that Ryan Mallett is better than Colin Kaepernick. That is like, Ryan Mallett should not be starting an NFL game at this point of his career. After the disaster he was in Houston 2 years ago, and then bouncing between teams after that, I mean, he had a lot of promise, but he turned out to be an idiot. Like, he is not an NFL quality, honestly, not even an NFL quality player. You know what, like, if we're having this conversation where I'm saying you cannot go into a game with Ryan Mallett at quarterback, even if it's just for one game, he's not an NFL quality player. What's the point of him? So, and you're going to go into those games with him over Kaepernick? Kaepernick took a knee during the national freaking anthem to protest something that is a serious issue in America, right? He didn't kill anyone. There are players in the NFL who have been accused of domestic violence, that have been accused of rape. And, I mean, there is a freaking video of that running back for giving Joe Mixon, something like that, for the Cincinnati Bengals. They just drafted him in the second round. There's a video of him striking a woman. And Colin Kaepernick isn't good enough to, or he's good enough to play for your team, but you don't want to sign him because he took a knee during the national anthem of like during every game last year. Because he quietly protested, which is the right, which he has the right to do. Like, seriously, did he hurt anyone? Did he do anything illegal? Maybe it's because I'm Canadian that I can't appreciate how mad people are. But, like, worst case scenario, and this is not how I feel about this the situation, worst case scenario, all I can see is that he made the story, he made the story about him and he was a whiner or whatever. I don't agree with that narrative, but that's the worst thing you can accurately say about Colin Kaepernick. And for that reason, you don't want him playing for your team? Like, it baffles me. He took a knee during the national anthem at the beginning of every game last year. And other players did it too. I mean, they followed suit with him, but still. It doesn't make sense. How fans could be this upset. But fans are weird, man. Fans are, I mean, I have to think that these are the same fans who wrote letters about how Cam Newton is a terrible influence on their kids because he dances in the end zone after a touchdown. Like, I just can't understand how people think that way. Like, Colin Kaepernick is what the Ravens need right now. There is no reason they shouldn't have signed him at this point. But you have all this fan outrage. And honestly, if you're an NFL owner and you're scared to sign Colin Kaepernick because you think, because the fans are writing you letters and stuff like that, grow some balls. Like, seriously. You really think Colin Kaepernick playing for the Baltimore Ravens for 3 games, being on the roster the whole season, you really think those fans aren't going to show up? You're an NFL team, let alone a team that won the Super Bowl a few years ago. You're the Baltimore Ravens. You think people aren't going to show up? You think people aren't going to buy jerseys? You're friggin' nuts. Even if it does make a difference, it will be so insignificant. You're scared of the fans reacting if you sign Colin Kaepernick. That's a joke. We'll see what happens with the Dolphins. I think Matt Moore is a good backup, but if you're giving me Matt Moore or Colin Kaepernick, I'm taking Kaepernick every day. So if Tannehill is actually hurt, yes, I would definitely sign Kaepernick. If he's not, I don't think it makes sense for the Dolphins, obviously. Tannehill is their starter. Moore is a fine backup. And I know I said before with Mallett that if you can't go into a game with Ryan Mallett at quarterback, then, what's the point? But it's different with Moore. I'm okay with going into a game or two with Matt Moore at quarterback. I'm just not okay with going into a season with Matt Moore as your starting quarterback the entire season. So if Tannehill's out long term, yes, Kaepernick. I've seen a lot of people say that they might pursue Jay Cutler. I'll say personally I prefer Kaepernick, although Cutler makes a lot of sense. I know he became the butt end of a lot of jokes last year, or the last few years really. There was that season where people were picking him to win MVP, and then he just fell completely off the face of the earth, became pretty much a joke. But he knows Adam Gase's system. He played for Adam Gase for a year, and that's huge. If you're bringing someone into the last second, especially quarterback, if you're bringing in a quarterback at the last second, he's got to know the whole playbook. He's got to be comfortable with the playbook. He's got to know where everyone's going. And Jay Cutler is by far the best bet outside of the Dolphins organization that would be able to do that, be able to be familiar with the system and stuff like that, right? Because he's played for Gase. And again, as much as people have joked around about Cutler, he is a very capable quarterback. He's definitely better than every backup quarterback in the league, save for maybe Jimmy Garoppolo. And he's better than some starters, just like Kaepernick. Again, is he in football shape? Because he retired. He went into an announcing career. So, is he in football shape for this season? We know Kaepernick is because he plans to play. Cutler didn't plan to play, so that would be a big issue for me. And I just think Kaepernick has more upside, right? They're both not really ideal starters in the league anymore. But Kaepernick does things that a lot of guys can't, like the way he runs. The Dolphins saw that firsthand last year when he almost got that. I think he was a yard or two short of sending the game into overtime when the Dolphins were supposed to smack the Niners. So, yeah, I just think there's way more upside with Kaepernick when it's Kaepernick versus Cutler, but Cutler would make sense as well, so I'd be okay with that too. But yeah, if Tannehill's out, I want them to pursue Kaepernick. If not Kaepernick, Cutler. But if his reputation goes into the decision making at all, that's just dumb. I don't think Stephen Ross is the type of owner that's one, scared to sign someone like that, and two, bothered by something like that. He supported his players last year when they knelt during the national anthem, so I don't think that'll be an issue with the Dolphins. The one thing is Kaepernick had some pretty stupid things to say last year about Fidel Castro going into his game with the Dolphins. I don't know the full details of it. I'm not a huge guy with like politics, especially in other countries outside of Canada and the U.S., but I know that he said some positive things about Fidel Castro after Castro died, and that really offended a lot of people in Miami, namely Armando Salguero, who is probably the number one beat reporter for the Dolphins. If you want any Dolphins news, you go to Salguero. And Salguero is Cuban, as a lot of people in Miami are, and they were offended by his comments because he said things that were pretty ignorant, and obviously the people who are actually from Cuba would not be ignorant that way. So I know people have said that, there'd be a lot of backlash with him fighting, or him playing in Miami due to those comments, but again, I don't think things like that should go into decisions about who's playing quarterback for your football team. That'd be pretty stupid. So, I don't think that should matter, but who knows, man. We have people saying Cam Newton isn't a good player or doesn't deserve MVP because he does a little Superman dance in the end zone, so what do I know? Anyway, on a more light-hearted note, I want to move on now to UFC 214. As I said at the top of the show, amazing event. Like, that card is one of the few times in MMA where you say, on paper, this is the event that I would show someone who's on the fence about MMA. Like, I've heard about it, but I don't know if I'll like it or if I'll be able to get into it. And you're like, okay, what card would be the best to show them? And you think that one looks good on paper. It's one of the few times that it was one of those cards, and it delivered in the fullest sense. Because you had some great fights, like you had the Cerrone-Lawler fight, which was back and forth, amazing fight between two of the sport's most exciting fighters. Again, on paper, that fight should have been amazing. It should have been fight of the night, and it was. It was an amazing fight. And like I said in the lead up to it, it wasn't one of those great fights where it's just like a slugfest between two really sloppy, tired fighters like Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner, where it's like entertaining to some extent, but like not really. It's entertaining, but it's just not technical. Lawler versus Cerrone, like a lot of their fights, especially Lawler, was just a 3-round technical masterpiece. They were just going fully from bell to bell, and but like they didn't get sloppy. They were still fighting like elite fighters would. They didn't get tired. They just kept going, and so it was a great fight. And then you had in the first fight, in the light heavyweight division, which is a quick knockout, which is always good, which always gets people, excited, especially when it's the first fight of the night. So, you go quick knockout, great back and forth 3-round fight. Then you had the Cyborg fight, which went on a little too long, but whatever. There's nothing you can do about that. Like, she did everything she could to finish the fight. And Tanya Evinger, I mean, the only thing she did wrong was be way too tough for her own good, right? Like, she just kept hanging on there, fighting this monster named Cyborg. Yeah, I mean, if anything, it was a showcase of one of the best fighters on this planet, man or woman, being Cyborg Santos, so it definitely wasn't boring. Like, it was kind of a squash match, but it wasn't boring, because you're just, the whole time, you're marveling at two things. One, holy shit, Cyborg is good, and two, holy shit, Evinger is tough. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't a boring fight, and it showcased one of the best fighters on this planet, who, hopefully now this isn't the case, but especially going into the fight, was one of the most underappreciated fighters on the planet. Like, Cyborg has been the best female fighter on the planet for years, for a very long time. And she still is, and this is her first UFC title fight. You know what I mean? She's, I want to say 19-1 now, with the one loss being in her very first fight, which I've said many times. A fighter's first 3 or 4 fights, especially out of the UFC, like, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, it's kind of like a wash. And since that first fight, she's undefeated. Every single one of her fights has ended in knockout, except for 2 went to decision. Like, that's as dominant as you can get. The only good fighters she hasn't fought are fighters that do not want to fight her. The champion at featherweight in the UFC, and you can't make, like, she literally vacated her title because she did not want to fight Cyborg. Like, if that's not telling of how dominant someone is, I don't know what is. Literally vacated her title. Ronda Rousey ran from her for years. I know she said the whole, like, oh, if you come down to 135, I'll fight you, but it was pretty obvious from the beginning that Cyborg would have to cut off a leg to make 135, whereas Ronda Rousey had started her career at 145, which is the weight class Cyborg fights at, so Ronda was the one running away from Cyborg there, and Cyborg would have killed her anyway. But yeah, it was a good showcase of how good she is. Hopefully now she gets the recognition she deserves. We'll skip over the co-main event because that was just terrible. So that isn't what you want to show your friends that aren't sure about MMA. And then you have the main event. The main event was MMA at its finest. Cerrone Lawler was great because you have 2 of the best welterweights in the world, going back and forth, it stayed technical, all that stuff. Great back and forth fight, lots of momentum swings. But Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones was, like, I don't know, it'll be a very long time before we see something that perfect in MMA again. Like, you had 2 of the most talented and skilled fighters, not just in light heavyweight, not just in the world, 2 of the most skilled and talented fighters of all time, at the height of their powers. Jon Jones is 30 years old. He's in his prime. And he proved it. He proved it on Saturday. Because I was one of those people who was kind of nervous that maybe all the time off and all the personal struggles he was having was going to affect his performances like it did when he fought over in St. Preux. Maybe we'd never see the same Jon Jones again. But he proved on Saturday he is in his prime. As scary as it is, Jon Jones has never looked better. And that's the guy that has been the best in the world for like 5 years now, and he's never looked better, right? And then Cormier, he's a little older, but he came into the sport old. He was not young when he came into the sport, and the loss to Jon Jones that he had 2.5 years ago only made him better. Like, look at his fights with Anthony Johnson, Alexander Gustafsson. Even look at this fight on Saturday. He looked totally different than he did the first time they fought. I said a bunch of times that the first time they fought was a little more competitive. than people remember it. If you go back and rewatch Jones versus Cormier 1, it's not the one-sided beatdown that people make it out to be. It was just very clear who the better fighter was in every round. I think Cormier won one round, and even then it was just like, there's no doubt John Jones is going to win this fight. Right? But it was still competitive. Like, he didn't kill him, but it was just very decisive that Jones was beating him for 5 rounds. But this one, like, there were some times in the first and second round where I was like, you know what, man, we might be in for a close one. I still felt Jones was winning the whole way through, but man, Cormier was taking it to him. He was hitting him. He has done a better job, probably in both fights actually, other than Alexander Gustafsson, who has a similar reach to Jones, so it's a lot easier for him. But other than Gustafsson, Cormier in both fights has done a better job than anyone of getting inside Jones's reach and hitting him without just getting obliterated in the process. Like, think back to when Rashad Evans fought John Jones, and every time Rashad even crept even the slightest bit into his own range, and Jones just let off these friggin' lightning quick elbows that seem physically impossible until you see them, and just smash Rashad every time. Every time. He'd come in with a jab, elbow to the face. Come in with a straight, elbow to the face. And it would just pop him back, and Rashad wouldn't even be able to land his punch. He'd just get elbowed, right? And then if he stayed on the outside, he'd get picked apart. That's what happens to a lot of Jones' opponents. The only time people actually get close to Jones is when he wants them to, and that's because for a guy who has the biggest reach in UFC history, he does more damage than anyone up close. Like in the clinch and on the ground, with his ground and pound is ridiculous, right? And his elbows, oh my god. But Cormier has done a better job than anyone of getting inside his range, which is tough enough, not getting hit, which is really tough, hitting Jones significantly, and then getting out. Like, no one does that. Sure, he had to eat a few shots a few times, but, like, he did it way more effectively than anyone. So you're seeing these two guys, like, I don't think people are appreciating it enough. I think people are all caught up in how the fight ended. Like, especially when you don't watch MMA a lot, you see someone get knocked out, and you're just like, oh, man, like, you know, Jones made Cormier his bitch, or he is, like the image of seeing someone get knocked out by another person is just like, yeah, he's not even on his level. That's not at all true in this fight, though. Like, I truly and honestly believe if John Jones either didn't exist or was born in a different era or whatever, Daniel Cormier would be the best light heavyweight to ever have lived and one of the greatest fighters of all time. Like, Daniel Cormier is phenomenal. He's beat everyone that matters at light heavyweight since he arrived at light heavyweight other than John Jones. And it's unfortunate for him because his legacy will never be able to recover from that. But he's beaten everyone other than John Jones. What you saw is a rare blend, and this does not happen often, not just in MMA but in any sport. You saw, and I'm willing to say, the two best fighters on the planet. Maybe, like, it's debatable. Like, I don't think it's debatable that I wrote an article about it, but I don't think it's debatable anymore that John Jones isn't the best fighter on the planet, because he definitely is. I will hear no different. The only person you can argue against Jones is Demetrius Johnson, but like I said in the article, Demetrius Johnson is fighting at flyweight. The difference between dominating flyweight and dominating light heavyweight, even with light heavyweight being weaker now, is just, come on. It's not even close. Like, Demetrius Johnson has beaten Joseph Benavidez, amazing fighter. That's a huge notch on his belt. He's who else has he even beaten? Like, Henry Cejudo? I mean, come on. That's the only one I can even think of. Besides, there's got to be someone I'm missing. Oh, John Dodson. John Dodson is a great fighter. But John Dodson, Joseph Benavidez, not really much else. Despite him tying the record for most consecutive title defenses, he doesn't really have a lot of big names on his resume because flyweight sucks. Like, let's be honest, there's not a lot of talent at flyweight. Maybe they're not developing the division properly. You could make an argument for that. Maybe they don't market the division properly. That's 100% true. But it's just not as good. Light heavyweight is struggling right now But look at the names on Jones's list, man. I mean, he was fortunate enough that he came up at the end of light heavyweight's golden era, because light heavyweight used to be the best division in MMA, and he was very fortunate enough to really come into his own just at the end of it, so that he did get to fight guys like Rashad Evans, and Lyoto Machida, and Shogun Hua, and Rampage Jackson while they were still in their prime. So he has a ridiculous resume. Like those guys I just named, he's got guys from this era, like he's beat Daniel Cormier twice, which, again, I'm arguing that is probably the most impressive notch on his belt, which is crazy because he has an amazing resume. He's beaten Daniel Cormier, even guys like Ryan Bader, who he's not that good, but still. Chael Sonnen, same thing. Like, Chael Sonnen and Ryan Bader have been at the top of. Like, Sonnen was at the top of middleweight for a while. People think that he, was just the guy who had that great rivalry with Anderson Silva, but Sonnen was a top middleweight for a few years. And even though he had to jump up a weight class to fight Jones, the fact that Chael Sonnen is one of the least impressive names on Jones's resume is friggin' unreal. Same thing with Ryan Bader. So he's really beaten the who's who. Like, he's beaten some legends. Some absolute legends. So I don't think it's debatable that Jones is the greatest of all time. Now, it's obviously debatable who's better than Daniel Cormier or Demetrius Johnson. Most people would definitely say Demetrius Johnson. I would probably agree, but I don't think it's too far-fetched to say Cormier's better. Like, seriously, if Jones didn't exist, Cormier would be undefeated. He'd be the champion. He'd be untouchable. Like, the only close fight he would have had in his career if he hadn't fought John Jones was that Gustafsson fight that he won. And I would pick him in the rematch. Undefeated. 2 wins against Anthony Johnson, Anthony Johnson's a wrecking ball, right? And also way bigger than Cormier. The fact that Cormier can, take him down and impose his will on him and choke him out when he's way bigger than him, that's nuts. So we had this really, really rare blend where everything just came together, where you have possibly the two best fighters on the planet fighting at the height of their powers, both in their prime. Because Daniel Cormier has never looked better, and John Jones has never looked better. And they have this amazing blood feud, maybe the most genuine feud in MMA history. Like, these guys hated each other. And I know Jones was, one of the more encouraging things coming out of this fight was how mature Jones was afterwards. If everyone remembers the first time after he gave the DX suck it to Cormier after their first fight, and started talking about how he hopes he was crying in the back and stuff like that. But this time he was very respectful, saying that he looks up to Cormier and he wants to be like Cormier, because, man, Cormier is a really, really good person. I know, you hear that about athletes all the time, and you've probably heard a lot on the broadcast, but Daniel Cormier is a legitimately really, really good person. Like, he's a nice guy. He's a father, he's a husband, and the kind of guy that, can laugh at himself. He's hilarious, and just not the kind of guy you want to see lose the way he did, but man, yeah, these guys hated each other going into it. Like, the trash talk varied on two levels. It was either really deep, entertaining trash talk, like the most genuine trash talk in all of MMA. I've always said that McGregor, the reason why he's the best trash talker of all time is because his seems more genuine than scripted, which differs to guys like Chael Sonnen. But Jones and Cormier, because they really hated each other, their trash talk, especially on Jones's part, was just genuine, but really cutthroat. Like, they weren't saying these things to get people talking. They were saying them because it's I don't like you, and this is how I feel about it. Like, bringing up each other's past. Like, Cormier always talking about how Jones is a druggie and stuff like that, and a criminal. And Jones bringing up some of the worst moments in Cormier's life, like having to drop out of the Olympics because he passed out while cutting weight. And saying, you always come second place, you're always second place, and stuff like that. Like, that is some deep trash talk. Like, that cuts like a knife. So you get that. So that's one level of it. And the other side of their trash talk which is almost as entertaining, is when they just turn to little kids. This is how you know it's genuine. When they turn to like, you think you're gonna kill me, John? You think I'm just gonna let you sit here and let you kill me, John? That doesn't make sense. Like that's hilarious because that's how you would just. These two guys, again, two people who really hate each other and who are having a real argument on live television that just say the first thing that comes to their head because they're so mad. It was amazing. So we won't see something like that in MMA for a long, long time if we ever do. Just, it was the perfect fight, and it's unfortunate that it's over. A part of me actually really wanted Cormier to win just to see it stretched out into a third fight, but, Jones winning and winning the way he did really cemented himself as the greatest of all time, in my opinion, and set him on a path to do something that no MMA fighter's ever done. Like, going forward, Jon Jones, again, in my opinion, he's already the greatest of all time, but he has this rare chance to prove that he's the greatest in a way that no one's ever done it. I wrote an article about it the other day, but we've never had a consensus greatest fighter of all time. For a long time, basketball had Michael Jordan. Hockey probably still has Wayne Gretzky, as the consensus greatest. It looks like football, Tom Brady is the consensus greatest, even though I disagree with that opinion, but that's a topic for another day. But the consensus in all those sports is that you know who the greatest of all time is. MMA's never had that, and Jones is on the verge of being that guy. He's that close. If he moves up to heavyweight and wins the title there, and I know I read the other day that he said he doesn't want to fight Stipe Miocic, but, he might change his mind when he, beats up Brock Lesnar, sees that he can do it at heavyweight, and then he goes back down and there's really nothing left for him to do. Because I have only seen 2 weight classes truly be cleaned out, where it's there's not one significant fight that this champion can have now. He has beaten everyone either super decisively so that there's no point in having a rematch, or he's beat them twice, and the only times I've seen that is with Demetrius Johnson in flyweight, but again, it's a very weak division, and Jon Jones in light heavyweight. And that's super impressive because, again, when he came up, it was one of the best weight classes in the UFC, right? He's truly cleaned out the division. All he needs to do, the only thing left for him at light heavyweight, maybe, is fight Alexander Gustafsson again. But I said since the minute the rematch, or the first match ended, that I think the rematch would be much more one-sided. I love Gustafsson. I think he's a great fighter. He's proven that he's the 3rd best light heavyweight in the world, if not the 4th best with Anthony Johnson coming back. But I just think that Jones took him lightly the first time. He didn't realize that, Gustafsson was the real deal, and if they fought again, I think he'd smack him. Especially if he stays in this mature state that he's in right now, I think he would smack him. It's not even a fight that's necessary. Another thing is that I know the whole Anthony Johnson coming back might throw a wrench in the whole Jon Jones clean out the division thing, because even though it made me feel a little more comfortable that with Johnson retiring without fighting Jones, that he lost to Cormier twice and Jones beat Cormier twice, which kind of means that Jones would beat Johnson or it's not worthwhile. But even if you do need to see Johnson and Jones fight, Johnson's friggin' massive. He can fight at heavyweight easily. So if Jones moves up to heavyweight, he could still fight Johnson. That's not off the table, right? But I think Lesnar's the perfect fight for Jones. Lesnar replicates, the very biggest of heavyweights, so he can really test himself against a very good fighter who is much bigger than him, who's much bigger than the opponents that he's used to facing, and that hits a lot harder than the opponents he's used to facing. So he can test that out while fighting a good fighter, but not a great one, right? Before he goes and fights the elite guys. Because if he beats Lesnar, whatever, goes back and beats Gustafsson, maybe beats Anthony Johnson, and then really rips through the heavyweight division and wins that title, he will be the consensus greatest of all time, and there will be no argument against it, especially if he maintains an undefeated record. Guys don't stay undefeated in MMA. They don't. Anderson, even when he got to the UFC, he wasn't undefeated. He went undefeated in the UFC for a while, but he wasn't unbeaten when he got there. And then he ended up losing, right? GSP's lost twice in the UFC. Even Jose Aldo lost in the UFC. Guys don't go undefeated in the UFC. But he's very close to doing something no one has ever done. Won 2 titles, including cleaning up the division, having the most impressive resume in all of MMA, especially if he had some heavyweights on there, and maintaining a perfect record, hands down. Especially like the way he fights, fighting guys at what they're best at, taking down wrestlers, standing up with kickboxers, like finishing guys. He's unbelievable. With Cormier going forward after this fight, it's going to be tricky. The way I see Cormier is that I don't think he's the kind of guy that's going to want to call it quits, especially after a loss like that. The thing is, he can if he wants to. He doesn't really have much left to prove. I mean, he already proved that he's the best light heavyweight on the planet right now, other than Jon Jones, by winning the title in his absence. There's not really much for him to prove, though, and he's made enough money to be comfortable, but he's already a broadcaster. He announces, he does analysis. If he wants to retire right now and just be an announcer, he can do that. Still make money, still be involved with the sport, put less wear and tear on his body, and be good, right? But I don't take it he's the kind of guy who, 1, wants to go out off a loss, and 2, doesn't want to compete for a long time. I know that he's talked a lot about how he kind of felt lost when he was done wrestling and hadn't found MMA yet. And so I definitely don't think he's calling it quits right now. So I think he needs to take some time off. If anything, just focus on his announcing career. But that was a loss that was painful in many ways. Getting knocked out, especially the way he did, he was in a bad way after the fight. But any knockout, you should take some time off. But that loss was just, like I said before, it was a blood feud. He needed to beat Jon Jones. And he's the kind of guy, and most athletes are like this, that needs to be the number 1 guy in the world. But like he said after the fight, it's not really a rivalry when one side does all the winning, right? He knows he'll never be able to beat Jon Jones now. He knows he will never be the greatest fighter of all time or the greatest fighter on the planet, and that's all he wants to accomplish. This is a very soul-shaking loss. John Morgan always says, MMA represents the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and it really did. On Saturday, it really provided a perfect example of that, because Jon Jones went out there and looked like the greatest fighter on the planet, whereas Daniel Cormier was just absolutely crushed, emotionally, just crushed. It's going to be hard for him to come back from that, so he needs to take some time off. But when he does come back, it just kind of depends on what Jones is doing. If Jones moves up to heavyweight, then, stay at light heavyweight, win the title again, prove that you're still one of the baddest SOBs on the planet, and, take over the light heavyweight division in Jones' absence. If Jones doesn't move up, if he decides to stay at light heavyweight, this will be kind of awkward for Cormier, because he will turn into one of those guys that you don't want to see him fight Jones again, because he's already lost twice. Maybe in a few years, if Jones is just running out of guys, all right, we got to do number 3. I mean, Cormier's amazing, and their last fight was great, so I wouldn't mind seeing it again. But it's just, we know what the result is going to be at this point. So he's probably not going to be able to get title shots if he stays at light heavyweight with Jones, and they're not going to give him a lot of good up and coming fighters, because they don't want him. They don't want a guy that they don't want to give a title shot to then go on and just smash every upcoming guy they have so that they can't get a title shot. So he'll be kind of stuck in limbo if he stays at light heavyweight and Jones is still there. So he'll have to move up to heavyweight, in my opinion. The problem there is that he's very good friends with Cain Velasquez, and they both want to be champions. And they can't do that if they're both fighting in the same weight class. And they both can't pursue their dreams without fighting each other. So that's going to leave him with a pretty tough decision. The thing is, Cain Velasquez gets hurt so much that I don't even think it would be an issue, but obviously they're not thinking like that. So that would be tough, because they're not just training partners, they're legitimately great friends in real life. So, but if he did move to heavyweight, I have no doubt in my mind he'd be the heavyweight champion. He already fought at heavyweight before he came to the UFC. Even in the UFC, he fought Frank Mir, he fought Roy Nelson, he fought a few times at heavyweight. before deciding to move down to light heavyweight. One, because it's probably his more natural weight, and two, because he didn't want to fight Cain. And Cain Velasquez was the champion at the time. So, yeah, it would be a little awkward for him, but I think it would be his best bet. Because then at least he can be competing for a title again. Unfortunately, UFC 214 had another fight. The co-main event between Tyron Woodley and Damian Maia for the welterweight title. Man, did that fight suck. Like, I mean, look, Damian Maia can be boring. He is one of those guys that's kind of like from the old grain in MMA, where he's very one-dimensional. Like, he's as one-dimensional as it gets right now. He has the best jiu-jitsu probably on the planet, and he might have the best jiu-jitsu in MMA history. Like, the guy's ridiculous. If he just gets a hold of you, he will wear you down and submit you, no problem. Like, if you let this guy grab a hold of you one time, you're done for the whole fight. I've seen him do it to guys who are bigger than him. I've seen him do it to great grapplers like John Fitch. When he out-grappled John Fitch and just basically John Fitch, that was when I realized that this guy his jiu-jitsu is amazing, and it can be very entertaining. When he gets a guy down and just smothers them and finishes them, it's amazing. Like, I still can't believe he choked out Carlos Condit. That fight was amazing. He bull rushed him, took him down, choked him out in like a minute and a half. It was unreal, and it's an impressive thing to watch. The problem, though, is that when he can't find the submission, he just ends up kind of like looking for it all match, which can be boring to watch. And the other problem is when he can't get the takedown, then it could turn into a bit of a stalemate. However, I am not going to blame the entertainment value of Saturday's fight on Damian Maia. At the end of the day, though Maia was unsuccessful on every takedown attempt, at least he was doing something that would lead to him controlling the fight and putting himself in a place where he can finish the fight and dominate. I think he was like 0 for 24, but still, at least he was trying. He kept trying to take him down. I know he could have thrown some more strikes, but like, you know what? At one point in his career, Maia tried to be a kickboxer in order to improve his game. It didn't work out. He realized, you know what? If I just, as a one-dimensional fighter, I can beat almost every guy on the planet. So I'm just going to keep doing that because, man, his striking will never be above average. Tyron Woodley, on the other hand, like, you want to talk about just playing defense. He would stop the takedown, and he would do nothing. Now, I usually don't get on a guy's case for being boring. You know what I mean? In most cases, I end up defending them. I usually commend guys for fighting smart because, you know what? You should do what you have to win, because the people who are saying your fights are boring, they're not going to pay your bills or anything like that. Being a champion ensures that people have some sort of interest in you, ensures that you'll get paid more. And so, you know, being a champion is everything, especially to guys like Tyron Woodley. Like, Conor McGregor, it doesn't matter if he has a belt. People want to watch McGregor fight. But guys like Tyron Woodley, they need the belt. They don't have the same personality as McGregor. However, there's a difference between fighting smart and not doing anything. Like, do something. He did nothing the whole fight. This fight was a disaster for Tyron Woodley. I've never seen a championship win where it was decisive, because everyone knew Woodley won. But I've never seen a championship win that was decisive that was so bad for a fighter's rep. Like, this was horrible for Tyron Woodley. Is quite possibly the most underwhelming champion in the UFC's history. Like, this guy, maybe it was because he knocked out Robbie Lawler, who's like a darling of the fans. But this guy, right after he won his title, he's getting booed at press conferences. He's getting booed at media appearances. Like, people just didn't like him from the get-go because he's just... He tries to talk smack, but it's not really that good, to be honest with you. And it's a more like a I'm the best and you guys aren't and you guys don't understand. You know what I mean? Like, fans, honestly, fans buy into a cocky fighter. They just don't want to be kind of told that they're stupid. And I feel like Woodley is kind of condescending. I don't know if that makes sense, but he's just not that kind of character. He's an amazing, and so whatever, he does all that. Fans already don't like him at the beginning of his title reign. And then he goes into the fight with Stephen Thompson, and it's pretty good. Goes to draw, it ends up being a majority draw. So it's like, it was a pretty good fight, and people were interested in the rematch. And the rematch happens, and it's like, what is happening? They stared at each other for 5 rounds. Nothing happened. One of the worst fights I've ever seen. Tyron Woodley and Stephen Thompson stared at each other for 5 rounds, and at the end of the fight, my brother asked me, "Who do you think won?" And I said, "I have no idea, and I don't care." Like, I've never seen a fight like that. As bad as Maia versus Woodley was, I think Thompson versus Woodley 2 might have been worse. Like, they just stare at each other. There was nothing. There was no pressing forward, nothing. And then the same thing happens in the Maia fight. So now you have a champion who wasn't popular to begin with. In fact, the fans disliked him. They just, I don't know, they just don't care about him. And then now he's coming off 2 of the worst fights in MMA history, or at least UFC title history. I also think it really hurts him that the guy that he dethroned as champion, Robbie Lawler, and he did it in exciting fashion too. He knocked Lawler out in the first round, and we all know Lawler's a very difficult guy to finish. That was the first time Lawler got knocked out since 2004. So, I mean, yeah, that's a pretty amazing thing to do, to knock him out in the first round. But the Lawler era as UFC champion was amazing. This guy, first he fights Johnny Hendricks for the vacant belt because GSP retired with it, and that's one of my favorite fights of all time. Just back and forth. You want to talk about momentum swings. Comes down to a minute left in the 5th round, and I'm like, I remember going into that 5th round thinking it's tied 2-2. And then going into the last minute of the 5th round saying, I don't know who's won this round, it's so close. And it literally comes down to Johnny Hendricks rocking Robbie Lawler with less than a minute left. And that's why I gave the fight to Hendricks, and I'm assuming that's why the judges gave it to Hendricks. Then he comes out in his next fight and just decks Jake Ellenberger. And they're like, all right. Oh, and then he fights Matt Brown in another 5-round great back-and-forth fight. And they put him back in the title picture. He fights Johnny Hendricks again, wins a rematch. Not as good as the first fight, but almost as good. It was a fight of the night. Then he has that fight with Rory McDonald, which is in my top 2 favorite fights for sure. Again, another back-and-forth fight. In the 5th round, it was actually 3-1 McDonald. You have at the end of the 4th round where they have that stare down, and they refuse to go to their corners because no one wants to break eye contact, and Lawler spits out blood, which is one of the most iconic moments in recent UFC history. And then, 5th round, McDonald's up 3-1, and Lawler knows he has to knock him out or have a dominant round and send it to a draw, and he ends up busting McDonald's nose open and knocking him out in the 5th round to win it. One of the greatest fights of all time. And then in his next fight with Carlos Condit, that's my other top 2 favorite fight of all time. And I knew on paper it was going to be amazing because they're the same fighter. They're just go, 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 non-stop striking, and it's technical, and it maintains its how technical it is throughout 5 rounds, which is very rare. And so I knew it was going to be amazing, right? So you have Robbie Lawler involved in 3 of the best fights of all time, maybe the 3 best fights of the last 3 or 4 years during his whole run as either champion or as a challenger. And then Tyron Woodley dethrones him and is involved in the 2 most boring title fights, at least during the modern era. So I think the difference between the last champion and the current champion is also really hurting him. It's just I don't know, it's baffling. Woodley is an amazing athlete, but he needs to start fighting again. Again, I get fighting smart. You have to focus on stopping the takedowns, maybe throw a lot less kicks, and you fight a little more defensively because the second you get taken down, that round is a wash. Maia wins the round right when he gets a takedown, because it's hard to get up when Maia takes you down. So I get it. Focus on stopping the takedown, fight defensive, all that stuff. But you do have to throw strikes at some point. Like, I mean, honestly, he barely won that fight because he didn't do anything. If Maia had even a little bit, like, if his striking was just a little bit better, he would have won. Because Woodley wasn't doing anything. If you can stop Damian Maia from taking you down 24 straight times, you can afford to throw a punch or two every now and then, especially at the end of rounds. Like, I'm telling you, there are many UFC fighters who would have knocked out Damian Maia in that fight. If Robbie Lawler's in the same position, he stopped Maia every takedown attempt, he would have knocked him out. That's the thing. It's not even that he didn't push for the finish. He didn't push for any offense whatsoever. He could have easily battered Damian Maia and probably knocked him out early in the fight, and he just did nothing. It was one of the most ridiculous performances I've ever seen. I usually don't get this upset at someone's performance when they won, when they did what they needed to win, but he didn't. He just did what he needed to not to lose, which is a weird thing to say. I don't know. He just wasn't pushing forward at all. It was not impressive at all. He is, again, probably the most underwhelming champion in UFC history. He hasn't had an impressive performance as champion yet. He had a draw, boring fight, where, again, he did nothing. He just kind of, walked into a win. It was friggin' weird, right? God, I don't know. He keeps saying, he can't wait to fight someone who's not a specialist so it could be less boring. I don't know how Stephen Thompson, being a striking specialist, made their fight boring when it was standing the whole time. I don't understand what his argument is. He seems to be on a different planet where he doesn't listen to what people are saying, and he really thinks that he's impressing people. He really thinks that these fights are going well, and when nothing is happening, and people are booing him. It's infuriating. I don't know what is going through his mind. I think he needs to fight a guy like Robbie Lawler again. Obviously the first fight ended with him winning pretty decisively, knocking him out in the first round, but I think he needs Lawler to really, like a guy like Lawler or Carlos Condit, who could really push him and not back down at all. I don't know. That being said, I don't think I ever want to see Damian Maia fight for a title again. It won't happen. He's like 39 years old. He's an amazing fighter, honestly. He'll go down in history as one of the greatest jiu-jitsu specialists in MMA history. But no one that one-dimensional will ever be the champion at a weight class that's as good as welterweight. It will never happen. I said it before the fight that it was intriguing to see what was going to happen with such an amazing athlete who has a wrestling base. Again, that's another thing. I don't understand how Woodley didn't. When you're that much more athletic and big than Maia, and you have a wrestling base, all these are a great formula to stop. Because Maia's not a great takedown artist. He's just a good submission specialist. If he can get you to the ground, he can submit you and he can control you there. It's getting you to the ground that's tough. And considering Woodley is so athletic, so much bigger than Maia and more powerful than Maia, and he has a wrestling base, I never thought he was going to be able to take Woodley down. I never thought Maia would be able to take Woodley down. I said it in my preview. So once he stopped him a few times, I just don't understand how he didn't just push, punch, do something, instead of standing there. But anyway, sorry, I got off track there. I went back to what I was talking about before. Someone that one-dimensional, I don't think can ever be champion. The sport has just evolved too much. Every champion is good at everything now. Even guys that never go to the ground, you have to be a good wrestler to stop takedowns, and then be able to use your striking that you excel at, right? I will never pick Damian Maia in a title fight. He'll beat some of the best fighters in the world. He'll take them down, he'll submit them. But at the end of the day, he'll never be the best fighter at his weight class because he'll never be able to. He's just too one-dimensional. Almost everybody in the welterweight division can outstrike him. He's not going to outstrike anyone, at least at the top of the weight class. And if that's the case, like when it's that easy to find a place to beat him, he's gonna lose he will not win a title, and I don't want to see it again. Especially with him being 39 years old. But yeah, hope I never have to talk about that fight again. Fortunately, we won't be seeing GSP versus Woodley, because that would just break my heart, seeing GSP come back for a fight that boring. But anyway. Well, this has been an extremely interesting episode of Mediocre Sports Talk. Keep coming back to check out my posts at www.mediocresportstalk.wordpress.com. I'll be putting up my NFL previews very soon, I promise, within the week. And next week, hopefully I'll have John back on the podcast. So come back expecting that. We'll probably be previewing the NFL season in audio version on that episode. So you have that to look forward to. But yeah, thanks for listening, and come back next week.